American History X was one of the most controversial films of 1998, tackling the delicate subject of neo-Nazism and featuring brutally intense scenes. But if you thought the movie itself was controversial, you have no idea what happened behind the scenes. On one side, a rising star with an oversized ego. On the other, a rebellious but brilliant director. They didn't get along during filming, but things truly spiraled out of control in post-production, when each of them fought to make a completely different movie. This is a story of clashing egos, outrageous statements, chaotic production meetings, and careers left in ruins. Both the film and its turbulent behind-the-scenes drama have one face at the center of it all: Edward Norton. He made his film debut in Primal Fear, a legal thriller where he played a young man accused of murder. His performance was universally praised, with critics hailing him as the new Robert De Niro, and it earned him an Oscar nomination for Best Supporting Actor. Almost overnight, he became Hollywood's most promising young star. Norton continued proving his talent with supporting roles in The People vs. Larry Flynt and Everyone Says I Love You, directed by Woody Allen. Around that time, Steven Spielberg offered him the lead role in Saving Private Ryan, but Norton turned it down. He wasn't looking for just any role. He was desperate for a lead performance that would define his career, one that would showcase his full range and cement him as a true star. He started reading every script that came his way, not just those from well-known directors. The 90s were a golden age for independent cinema, a time when bold, unconventional films launched careers. Norton believed that was where he had the best chance of striking gold, and he was right. Before long, he came across the script for American History X. From here on, the story takes a turn into absolute madness. But to truly understand what happened, we need to go back a little further, to the early 1990s. The script that landed in Edward Norton's hands was written by David McKenna. He grew up in California during the rise of punk rock and the emergence of skinhead gangs. During high school, he met one and saw firsthand the disturbing acts of racism and violence they committed. It made him wonder how someone could grow up filled with so much hatred. He also asked himself, is that kind of hatred something that can be unlearned? Drawing from his memories, reflections, and research, McKenna set to work on the first draft of the script. Between April and May of 1992, he shut himself in his Los Angeles apartment as the city erupted in riots over the Rodney King case, the brutal beating of a black man by white police officers. That unrest bled into his writing. In just 6 weeks, McKenna had completed the first draft of American History X. The story follows Derek Vineyard, a young man consumed by resentment after his father is murdered by a black drug dealer. Fueled by rage, he rises to lead a neo-Nazi group. A brutal crime sends him to prison, where he slowly begins to change and reclaim his humanity. Once released, he tries to stop his younger brother Danny from following in his footsteps, but by then, it's already too late. Confident in his script for American History X, McKenna set out to sell it. Hollywood executives were intrigued, but the script was so dark that no one had the guts to take a chance on it. Then came Savoy Pictures, a small studio willing to put up $9 million to make the film. At just 25, McKenna had officially made it as a professional screenwriter, but only a few days later, Savoy went bankrupt. Fortunately, Michael DeLuca, New Line Cinema's president of production, stepped in and rescued the project. The studio had made its mark in the 80s with the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, and by the 90s, it was backing bold, boundary-pushing films like David Fincher's Seven. DeLuca was drawn to McKenna's script. Its raw honesty hit him hard. He saw the potential for something truly powerful, as long as it was done right. By 1996, it was official. New Line Cinema would produce American History X. McKenna was brought into the development process and given a co-producer credit. He knew making a great film wouldn't be easy, but he had no idea just how brutal the process would get. The budget for American History X was set at $20 million. Not a huge sum, but enough to make an uncompromising, mature film. New Line Cinema needed a director who was talented, bold, and, most importantly, budget-friendly. When the project was still at Savoy, they approached Dennis Hopper to direct. A legendary filmmaker with a rebellious edge, Hopper asked for a $1 million paycheck, too steep for the budget. Meanwhile, DeLuca reached out to Larry Clark, fresh off the buzz from his debut film, Kids, but Clark was already tied up with other projects. As the search dragged on, DeLuca suggested British director Tony Kaye. One of the most sought-after names in commercials and music videos, Kaye was a visionary who blended striking visuals with raw realism. Big brands and top artists fought to work with him. But Kaye wasn't just talented, he was a character in his own right. Before shooting a single frame of film, he bought ad space to proclaim himself the greatest British filmmaker since Alfred Hitchcock. He always saw advertising as a stepping stone to his true passion, cinema. Despite making a fortune in commercials, he felt it had pulled him away from his real dream, making movies. So when Hollywood came calling, he listened. But he wasn't about to take just any project. The powerhouse producer Jerry Bruckheimer pursued him relentlessly, pitching project after project. Kay turned him down every time, almost gleefully. But he never forgot Bruckheimer's parting words: "If you don't make your first movie with me, you'll end up crying." Once he was done turning down Bruckheimer, Kay got the script for American History X. He connected with the story, especially as a practicing Jew, but he found McKenna's script weak. Still, he was confident he could make it his own, adding, reinventing, and improving what was already on the page. Kay met with DeLuca and McKenna to pitch his vision for the film, which included shooting sequences in black and white, one of his trademarks. The studio was so impressed, they also hired him as the film's cinematographer. McKenna found it amusing that a British eccentric was directing his script, but soon enough, he'd realized just how truly eccentric Kay was. Quirks aside, Kay was fully committed to the project. He told McKenna the script was still missing something. McKenna revised it again, but Kay believed they needed to dive deeper into the world they were trying to capture. One night, the two snuck into a skinhead party. The atmosphere was tense. At one point, McKenna found himself face-to-face with a guy who had an M16 tattooed on the side of his head. It was intimidating, but he managed to talk to him for an hour. As their conversation wrapped up, the man asked, "Are you going to make us look like a bunch of idiots?" McKenna pushed down his fear and assured him that wouldn't be the case. With the director in place, the production of American History X set out to find its lead. And that brings us back to Norton, discovering the script. Though he would go on to define the role of Derek Vinyard, Norton wasn't the first choice. Kay initially set his sights on another rising star, Joaquin Phoenix, but Phoenix turned it down, calling the idea repulsive. Years later, he would develop a reputation for being just as intense, particularly with Joker, but that's a story we've already covered in another video. With no lead in place, casting director Valerie McCaffrey suggested Edward Norton. Kay wasn't convinced, but New Line Cinema pushed for him. Norton loved the script and the character. He saw Derek as a complex figure, consumed by rage, yet capable of redemption. Audiences could empathize with him, and the role would also give Norton the breakthrough he had been waiting for. Despite his doubts, Kay met with Norton. He admired his intelligence and even noted his athleticism, but he wanted someone who commanded fear, and Norton didn't seem threatening at all. This would be the first of many clashes between them. But Norton was determined. He even agreed to cut his salary in half, from $1 million to $500,000. More importantly, he promised to transform his physique to look the part. Kay agreed, but wanted to keep a close eye on him to make sure he was serious. To his surprise, in just 4 months, Norton packed on 30 pounds of muscle and carried himself with real authority. That's when Kay admitted, this wasn't Edward Norton anymore. This was Derek Vinyard. To round out the cast, Kay and New Line Cinema brought in a few seasoned actors, including Elliot Gould and Beverly D'Angelo. The role of Danny went to Edward Furlong, who was still widely recognized for playing John Connor in Terminator 2. With the cast and crew in place, American History X was ready to start filming. Up to that point, there had only been a few eccentric moments, but now, the real problems were about to begin. Filming for American History X began in early 1997 in Venice Beach, California. From day one, Norton proved his dedication to the role of Derek. He shaved his head, stuck to an intense training regimen, and, most importantly, fully embodied a man consumed by hatred. His commitment was undeniable. It motivated both his co-stars and the crew. But the one who commanded the most attention was Kay. On the first day of filming, he arrived in a Lincoln Town car with a chauffeur, his license plate reading Jewish. He also carried 4 cell phones and a fax machine. Then, without a word, he wandered around the set in silence. Before Norton and the rest of the crew could even begin to wonder what he was doing, Kay grabbed the camera, adjusted the lighting for the first scene, and gave precise instructions to the cast and crew. Within minutes, everyone was working. This became his daily ritual. Kay knew he was cultivating an eccentric image, and he embraced it. His idol was Francis Ford Coppola, not just for his filmmaking genius, but for the way he made Hollywood bend to his will. It was a strategy that worked for a while. But there was no hiding the tension between Norton and Kay. Norton had little patience for the director's erratic behavior, while Kay still wasn't fully convinced about his lead, who, of course, had New Line Cinema's unwavering support. Still, they both knew the film could be a turning point in their careers, so they put their differences aside to create something unforgettable. That commitment was especially evident while filming one of the movie's most disturbing scenes, Derek confronting 2 black burglars and brutally slaughtering one of them. Kay meticulously planned every shot. He first photographed each detail using stand-ins, then worked out the camera angles and lighting from there. For the victim, he cast Antonio David Lyons, drawn to his striking features, especially the way his face conveyed raw vulnerability as he bit down on the curb. Of course, the head Norton crushes in the scene belonged to a prosthetic dummy. Between Norton and Kay stood David McKenna, the screenwriter. He was on set every day, watching his vision come to life. Seeing the director and lead actor put aside their differences to work together made him genuinely happy. He also loved the film's visual style, a striking blend of raw intensity and cinematic precision. Filming for American History X wrapped in May 1997. Despite the tensions, things ended on relatively good terms. But unlike other stories we've covered on this channel, the real nightmare didn't happen during production. It happened in post. And get ready, because this is more than just a behind-the-scenes drama. It's a lesson in teamwork, and more importantly, a warning about choosing your collaborators wisely. At first, post-production on American History X was a smooth process for Kay. After approving Ann Dudley's score, he sat down with editor Alan Heim to shape the film. Both stayed true to the script, but Kay had never been fully convinced by McKenna's work. He felt there were too many scenes of characters crying and hugging. In his mind, the film needed to be tighter, faster, stripped of sentimentality. So he put together a 95-minute cut. He trimmed what he considered unnecessary and, most controversially, changed the original ending. Instead of closing with Danny's murder at the hands of a black teenager, Kay's version had Derek reverting to his old ways, becoming a skinhead again. According to Kay, his cut of American History X, which he saw as a diamond in the rough, was well received by New Line Cinema in a private screening. But the next day, he got studio notes. Everyone wanted him to stick to the original script. McKenna joined the pushback, unable to understand why Kay, whom he considered a friend, was so fixated on taking the film in a completely different direction. But the most furious of all was Norton. He refused to accept that his character would end up even worse than where he started. Instead of accepting the studio's notes, Kay doubled down, insisting he could make the film even shorter. That's when Norton took his complaints to the studio, demanding they step in. For Michael DeLuca, it felt like déjà vu. He had already lived through a similar nightmare at New Line Cinema with The Island of Dr. Moreau. That film's downfall began when original director Richard Stanley clashed with its star, Val Kilmer. Back then, the studio sided with Kilmer, and in American History X, they backed Norton. They even allowed him to take part in post-production alongside another editor, Jerry Greenberg. Kay was outraged. He didn't hesitate to declare, "I'm fully aware that I'm a first-time director, but I deserve the same autonomy and respect as Stanley Kubrick." Unfortunately for him, Kay was no Kubrick, and he realized it every time he clashed with Norton in the editing room. Kay would argue his case only to be stunned by Norton's razor-sharp rhetoric. The actor wasn't just articulate, he knew exactly how Hollywood worked. Kay, on the other hand, still believed Norton knew nothing about directing. Even when Kay had valid points, it didn't matter. Norton had DeLuca on his side. After yet another heated argument, Kay lost control. He swung his fist, ready to take a shot at Norton, but at the last second he punched a wall instead. The impact was so brutal that he needed several stitches. As the fighting continued, post-production dragged on for months. It wasn't until June 1998 that Norton and Greenberg completed a new cut of American History X, 40 minutes longer than Kay's version. New Line Cinema preferred this cut, and McKenna celebrated Norton's involvement. He even went so far as to say it felt like rescuing a child from an abusive father. But Kay was horrified. The film now included all the hugging and crying scenes he had fought to remove, plus a redemptive ending. And to make matters worse, Norton had given himself more screen time. At this point, Kay saw him as nothing more than an insufferable narcissist. But instead of giving up, he begged DeLuca for one last chance to make his own final cut. Reluctantly, DeLuca agreed to a meeting, but Kay didn't show up alone. He brought a rabbi, a priest, and a Buddhist monk. They hadn't seen any version of the film. Kay just wanted them there to lighten the mood in what he knew would be a difficult conversation. He even told them, "You don't have to take my side, but if you have something to say, say it." The rabbi, the priest, and the monk were completely baffled. But Kay, desperate for divine intervention, actually got what he wanted. Maybe just to get rid of him and his 3 guests, DeLuca gave him 8 more weeks to edit yet another version of American History X. Kay had been given a second chance, one that would determine his future in the project and even in Hollywood. At first, he claimed to have a bold new vision, though he wasn't sure how long it would take. He brought in poet Derek Walcott to record a new voiceover. But that was about as far as he got. Instead of focusing on the edit, Kay let himself be consumed by his hatred for Norton and New Line Cinema. He spent $100,000 to place 40 subliminal ads in industry publications like Variety and The Hollywood Reporter. Using quotes from William Shakespeare and John Lennon, he launched veiled attacks on Norton and the studio. Kay enjoyed the chaos, relishing his role as Hollywood's newest rebel. But his antics came at a price. Between the ad campaign and his failure to deliver a new cut, he was officially removed from American History X. That could have been the end of the battle between Norton, New Line Cinema, and Kay. But in reality, it was just the beginning. The premiere of American History X was set for September 1998 at the Toronto Film Festival. Norton saw it as the perfect opportunity for both audiences and critics to witness what he considered his most intense performance to date. But the announcement of the screening infuriated Kay. He was convinced they would be showing Norton's cut. Determined to stop it, he flew to Canada and personally met with Piers Handling, the festival's director, to demand that the film be pulled from the lineup. And he succeeded. But Kay wasn't done yet. He took his fight to the Directors Guild of America, requesting that his name be removed from the credits of American History X and replaced with an alias like Humpty Dumpty. The Guild denied his request, citing his public outbursts as the reason. Frustrated and overwhelmed, he filed a $200 million lawsuit against both the Guild and New Line Cinema. When that also failed, he considered more extreme measures, orchestrating attacks on theaters, showing the film, or sending protesters to block entrances. But he was exhausted. He realized the war was lost. It was time to walk away, from the film, from the fight, and from everyone involved. Amid the controversy, American History X hit theaters on October 30th, 1998. It grossed $23 million, barely surpassing its $20 million budget. While mainstream audiences largely ignored it, critics embraced the film. No one was happier than Norton. His performance was universally praised. He was no longer just the new Robert De Niro. He was Edward Norton, an artist in his own right. The impact of his performance earned him an Oscar nomination for Best Actor. But Norton's rise to fame came with a reputation for being difficult. In Hollywood, people praised his talent, but they also whispered about his controlling nature, his ability to shape a film's final cut. Meanwhile, American History X secured its place in modern pop culture. But how did it affect the people who made it? Over the years, American History X built a dedicated cult following and is now considered one of the essential films of the 90s. But more than anything, it forever changed the lives of those who made it. David McKenna, the man who started it all, established a steady career in Hollywood. He continues to develop films and TV shows and has never stopped being grateful for how New Line Cinema treated him. Speaking of the studio, in 2008, New Line merged with Warner Brothers, where Michael DeLuca remains one of its top executives. As for Edward Norton, he achieved the long-coveted status of a Hollywood star. He also directed a few films, but as we mentioned earlier, his perfectionist tendencies led him to interfere in productions where he was only supposed to act. This caused problems on films like Red Dragon and The Incredible Hulk. Even so, his talent is widely respected by colleagues and directors alike, ensuring he's never truly sidelined in the industry. And what about Tony Kaye? After the post-production scandal, Hollywood shut him out. The advertising agencies that once idolized him and tolerated his eccentricities cut ties with him. He went from being a visionary to a pariah. Kaye realized he had gone too far, and the price was steep. Still, he held on to some of his prestige and managed to rebuild his career. While his later films never matched the impact of his debut, they helped him restore some of his reputation. As for American History X, he eventually learned to appreciate the final cut and harbors no resentment toward Norton or DeLuca. American History X set out to expose the consequences of hate and intolerance, yet its production was filled with those very same things. Some came out celebrating, others were left in tears. Despite everything, what remains is a film that continues to stir as much controversy as its own making.